Streaming now on CBS News Los Angeles, this is Primary Countdown. Less than a week to go, a crowded field narrowed. 3 leading contenders in the race for LA mayor. Can Kevin De Leon catch frontrunners Rick Caruso and Karen Bass? And a heated contest for LA County Sheriff with just days remaining. Who has emerged as the biggest challenge to incumbent Alex Villanueva? And the battle for Congress, the issues taking center stage as we head into the midterm election. Just a week from the countdown, the critical primary countdown, and of course we will be following all of the latest developments as we go forward. The heated contest continues, and LA voters are set to narrow down their top picks for LA mayor from a crowded field, or just 2, perhaps choosing the next mayor outright. Congresswoman and candidate for LA Mayor Karen Bass going door to door in Leimert Park, meeting voters. Now just 1 week to go until the election.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It's been a little brutal.
Bass is working hard to lock up one of the top 2 spots in the primary. And with recent polls showing many undecided voters still out there, she's now making her final pitch.
To me, the closing argument is that, I've been immersed in these issues for a long time. I think it's going to take every level of government in order to solve this problem, and I have relationships on every level.
Look at that hand. Where's that hand going?
Billionaire developer Rick Caruso was also out campaigning Monday in the Pico Robertson neighborhood. Caruso emphasizing his experience in business when asked about rising prices and the potential threat to the economy.
The city really needs somebody at the top, the mayor that understands business, because we need to reduce the cost of doing business in this city to help support small businesses like the one we're standing in, because everything that this family is doing is going to cost more money.
Caruso continuing his pitch that he's the one who will make the city safer.
Everybody's talking about they want their families to be safe, their kids to be safe, to be able to go out and sit and have lunch or dinner and not worry about it, be able to walk to the synagogue. This Jewish community needs to be able to walk in peace and freedom and safety. And hate crimes are up 130%. We should all be outraged.
Of LA County's 5.6 million registered voters, just over 384,000 ballots have been returned. About 4,500 people have cast a ballot in person.
People are waiting to vote. A lot of people still, that's one thing that I've encountered, was a number of people who have their ballots, but they want to go vote in person. They don't have confidence in putting their ballot in the mail, and that's understandable. They don't know necessarily that you can actually track your ballot and know that it's been counted.
City Councilman Kevin De Leon's campaign also says he is ramping up his voter outreach here in the final stretch. We're told he'll be canvassing neighborhoods, visiting businesses, and holding events with community leaders. And for analysis on this and other headlines from this week, the campaign trail, we are bringing in our panel of political experts. And joining me once again tonight is Fernando Guerra, political science professor at LMU, and veteran LA City and County leader Zev Yaroslavsky, now at the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs. Thank you both for joining me so much. We really appreciate you coming. And of course, the mayoral election now just days away. What are the biggest headlines right now, Professor Guerra, that you're seeing?
Well, number one, there's a lot of discussion about whether Rick Caruso can get 50%. I don't believe so, but the discussion is that he's been gaining track, and every time there's a survey or a poll, it shows him with a higher percentage of the vote. And if you extrapolate, you say, oh, he'll get over 50%. I think it's way too difficult. It really has narrowed down to a 2-person race, Congresswoman Karen Bass and a developer, Rick Caruso.
And Zev, do you think that it's possible that Zev could cross over that 50% line and win this thing outright?
Well, you meant Rick. I wish I had his resources, but look, the likelihood of this being won in the primary are slim, but they're not impossible. What's of interest to me is that the voter turnout thus far is extremely low and extremely older. The plurality of people who have voted thus far, returned their ballots to the county registrar, are over 65 years of age. Well over half the people who have voted so far are over 55. That probably helps Caruso a bit. It's a more conservative vote, but there's still 6 days left. I think the turnout's going to be lower than we all expected. If the numbers quadruple between now and Tuesday, right now 8% of the people have returned their ballots, so it would be 32%, which is a lot lower than what we anticipated. So I think it's unlikely. I agree with Fernando that it could be won in the primary, but it's not impossible.
In terms of the money that we've been talking about, Professor Guerra, I mean, he's record-breaking spending here for Caruso. It does seem like he's trying to push it to that 50% line, just because if he does have to compete in the general, it's a whole different kind of race, right? I mean, there's a lot more tension on it. People are much more focused in November.
No, I mean, I think he's done a cost benefit analysis, and his consultants are telling him, look at the projections. It's possible for us to win it. And if you make certain assumptions, they're right. And given how much money he has, if I was their campaign, I would go for it as well. I think there's a slim chance. And so from them, it's like, hey, why not spend another 5 million right now instead of another 25 in the general election? So it's a risk that has a lot of benefits and little cost other than his own money, and he's got plenty of that.
And then under the sheriff's race, that's obviously one of the other high-profile races we're seeing here. There hasn't been too much polling done on this, but if you had to sort of kind of give a guide of where this race stands right now, Zev, where do you think Alex Villanueva is? Do you think he's in danger?
Yeah, I think he's in danger of being forced into a runoff. What happens after that is anybody's guess. We in my survey, which is not of registered voters exclusively, but most of our countywide respondents are registered voters. His favorability versus unfavorability rating was 37-33. That's not nothing. It's nothing to cheer about if you're Villanueva. He's very controversial. He's very divisive. He's been in a perpetual fight with the Board of Supervisors, with the Inspector General, with the Citizens Oversight Commission. He's got a lot of baggage on him, but he's stabilized too. He dropped in popularity over the last 2 or 3 years since he took office, but it's stabilized, and he's actually improved his lot a tad. And he's got good feral instincts. He's used George Gascon, the district attorney, who's very unpopular right now. He's used him as a foil, and he's tried to capitalize on certain issues. So I don't rule him out in the general, but I do not believe he's going to get 50% plus one on Tuesday.
Professor Guerra, who do you think has the best chance at this point of defeating him?
Well, I think he will be the top vote getter this June. I don't think he gets 50%. And then really it's the race between, I think, former police chief of Long Beach, Luna, Eli Vera, and a couple of others. And that's really the race. The race is who's going to come in second. And also Cecil Rambo from LAX police. And I think almost all of the other candidates, with the exception of one, will probably endorse whoever comes in second. And I think you'll see the vast majority of political and civic LA endorse that individual, including the LA Times and a bunch of other organizations. And it will be tough for Villanueva, I think, to survive in November. It's a long time. You ask me in 4 or 5 months, I might change my mind. But right now, he doesn't win 50% in the primary, and he probably loses in November.
And then, Zev, I mean, there is still this variable, even though we've had mail-in voting now for a few years, it hasn't been universal for an LA mayor's race. So that does add kind of a wild card, right?
Well, I think it changes the nature of the turnout, right? It's I mean, the turnout in the 2017 mayor's race, I believe, was under 20%, 15 to 17%, something on that order, which was extremely low. If it gets into the 30% turnout range or 35%, that'll be more than twice as much as what it was before. I think in the general election in November, the turnout will be considerably higher than what it was in what it is going to be on Tuesday. That favors the more Democratic candidate, the more progressive candidate, because the difference between those who vote in the primary and those who vote in the general election are people who are working people, people who focus their attention on the main event, not the prelim, so to speak. And so you may see a 40-50% turnout in November, which will change the whole demographic from the primary, and it's radically different than it was in 2017, when you could almost count on two hands the number of people who came out to vote.
All right, let's hit one more topic here. This is this is probably on some people's radars just from seeing these ads on TV. So this last topic, it's online betting, right? The commercials, as I said, are pretty much nonstop for a lot of folks. And Indian tribes with casinos want to ban companies with FanDuel and DraftKings from ever taking bets on sporting events. Again, you've seen those ads. Let's take a look at one of the clips.
FanDuel and DraftKings, two out-of-state corporations making big promises to Californians. What's the real math behind their ballot measure for online sports betting?
Here you have it. Here's the thing: the online betting proposition is not even in the primary, right? For this coming up, it's going to be in November. But Professor Guerra, what impacts do you think this will have, and how big an issue is this?
Well, number one, I saw the ads as well, and I got confused. I said, wait a minute, I teach California politics. There's not supposed to be initiatives in the primary anymore. It's in November. What's happening? And of course, you're right. They're trying to preempt another potential amendment or proposition. And so there's big money. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. The Supreme Court has said that you can now have sports gaming. California hasn't decided what to do. And the state legislature is supposed to take care of it, but they're not doing it. So then the interested party, the multi-billion-dollar industries, are fighting it amongst themselves and distorting the entire initiative process to get an advantage for their product. It's all naked politics. The legislature should step up and do something about it. They're not going to. It's the same that we're doing with marijuana after marijuana passed, and the lack of a regime to really do a coherent policy. There's no coherent policy. Public policymakers are punting on this. Therefore, it's the Wild West. Hundreds of millions of dollars are going to be spent on this initiative and these commercials. You think you're seeing some now? Wait until we get close to November.
Right. Could be the most expensive in history, right?
Well, absolutely.
May already be.
Yeah. All right. Thank you both so much for joining us, as always. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right.
Primary Countdown continues right after the break. And from gun control to abortion to the influence of former President Trump, the issues and their impact on races nationwide, like I said, when Primary Countdown comes right back. Welcome back to Primary Countdown. I'm Tom Waite. We're joined by CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Ed, thanks so much for joining us. Let's talk a little bit about the midterms first. What are we seeing in terms of polling for control over the House and Senate?
Yeah, well, look, depending on which survey you look at, it all essentially tells us the same thing, that it's looking, at least in the House, like Republicans will likely take at least slim control of the chamber. And then the Senate, still probably a toss-up, but perhaps leaning towards Republicans. You don't know this stuff until the votes are cast and counted, and there's plenty of time for things to change. But you've got a few historical things going for you at this point if you're Republicans. A, you're the party not in control of this House. And historically, it's the party not in control of the White House that does well in midterm congressional elections. And so there's that. Secondly, you've had lines redrawn in many different states, big ones especially across the country, by Republican state legislatures that mean that many of these more competitive seats now are likely to favor Republicans. So that helps them out as well. Third, of course, is the way the poll numbers are breaking right now. And they're breaking against the president and against Democrats, primarily over issues of dollars and cents. Inflation, concerns about the economy generally, even though job creation's doing well and employment is low. Big concerns about the cost of things, whether it's gas, whether it's food, whether it's other issues. And then just the lingering effects of the pandemic and the supply chain concerns and whatever else. And Democrats are struggling to explain why they deserve to continue to maintain power. So if you're someone who wants to place bets on who is going to control Congress after November's elections, you want to place that bet today, I don't recommend it, but you'd probably put money on Republicans. And yet, you got to remember that we're not that, that there's still several months to go. And we still live primarily, Tom, in a 50-50 country where, things remain relatively even when it comes to control of states and to Congress.
And the other two big headlines, we'll get more into inflation in just a second here, but of course, gun control and the abortion debate, those two headlines are,
Right.
They may loom large, right? Or maybe they won't. We just don't know how that might factor in.
We don't. Look, they may factor more into states like California, which are predominantly Democratic. where it's something that Democratic candidates in predominantly Democratic-leaning congressional districts can talk about it and expect to find support and concern and help draw out voters. But is it going to be a factor in other states and in other ways? We just don't know yet. And the issue with gun control, I think this is important to remind people, because we always get the question, why isn't anything done after a horrific massacre like the ones that have taken place most recently there in California or in Buffalo or in Texas? Can you name, Tom, a political candidate at the state or federal level who's lost an election in the last 20 years because they voted against gun control? You can't necessarily, right? There hasn't been, there have not been consequences for voting against gun control bills. There have been more consequences for voting for them. And unless or until that those that believe there need to be tougher gun laws can somehow find a way to hold politicians accountable for not necessarily doing that, the MO in Washington, at least, is going to be that there's no necessarily political will to do it. And that's, that's up to voters to decide. But while there's a lot of talk about it and while there's a lot of concern, there isn't enough support in Congress for it to happen. And so Democrats may use that as something to run on, maybe even some moderate Republicans. But unless or until there's some example of either enough gun control supporting politicians getting elected or people losing because they didn't support it, it's going to be hard to get Congress to really move in that direction.
Right. Like you said, it's a very red state, blue state situation. Let's move on to the Trump factor. We saw in the last primaries last week, especially in Georgia, that the candidate of choice for former President Trump got shellacked, that being Mr. Perdue. What do you think will happen in terms of his influence going forward? And what are you seeing sort of in the aftermath of last week's primaries?
Look, you can go state by state, situation by situation. Part of the issue is the quality of the person that Trump-inspired or Trump-backed candidate is facing. In the case in Georgia, Governor Kemp was just a popular figure, is a popular figure among Republicans in the state. You ask him why, first thing they'll say is, well, he's maintained a pretty strong economy, job creation's been pretty healthy, and he reopened the state during the pandemic at a faster clip than other states, and we seem to do okay. So on issues beyond the former president, he seemed to do all right. You've seen a few other gubernatorial candidates endorsed by the former president also lose because they were running again against either popular incumbents or other Republicans who just found more favor at the state level. Where he has done pretty well is at the Senate level and to some extent in House races. And that's because, you can see the former president's influence on those federal races perhaps a bit more. There are going to be a handful more. I think the big one to watch now will be in August in Wyoming, when Congresswoman Liz Cheney's in a Republican primary. The former president's now directing all of his attention and firepower at her, trying to get her defeated. It may or may not happen, but if it doesn't happen, in an overwhelmingly Republican state, in a state that supported him by more than 40 points over the Democrat, then it's a sign that perhaps he doesn't have as much juice as he used to among Republicans, not just in places like Georgia, but also in reliably red states like Wyoming.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see what happens with Liz Cheney. Of course, now she's sort of his arch nemesis, being on the January 6th committee. Last question for you, and you'll be covering this, the agenda for the Summit of the Americas, which will be in Los Angeles. I'm just curious, how do you think politically this is going to play out? Because we still don't even know who's going to be there.
We don't. And we just asked about it again today, and they still won't tell us who exactly has been invited, claiming that they've got plenty of time. I think if you're a leader of a country in this hemisphere who's supposed to be attending this kind of thing, you might be a little disturbed that you don't yet know the details and might find it a little weird that they haven't announced who exactly is coming. All we know is that the president will be coming out. Among others, he's meeting with the president of Brazil. We also know that the vice president and her husband, who are, of course, LA-based, will be there the entire week, attending the summit and some other events on the periphery of the big event. And then we'll see what exactly this summit is about. Is it about immigration? Is it about the flow of illegal drugs across the border? Is it about economic development? Is it about countering the rise of China across Central and South America especially? And is it about bolstering democracy? One other thing we haven't heard about, Tom, that I think guys like you and I and people who are concerned about a free press and democracy generally should be wondering about is whether or not the president will hold a news conference amid a series of leaders who do not represent countries that have strong records on press freedom, who do not engage their press corps that often. One would hope that the leader of the free world would do that when he's in Los Angeles. We'll see if he does it. But lots still to learn about what exactly is going to go on. This much we know. There will be a few dozen leaders from across the hemisphere. They will be discussing a bunch of things, and it will add to the already tricky traffic situation there in central Los Angeles.
The way you're describing it kind of makes me think of when former President Trump met with Kim Jong-un, and they did hold a press conference, and Kim Jong-un took questions. So I guess stranger things have happened, right? We'll see.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Ed O'Keefe, senior CBS correspondent for politics and the White House. We really appreciate your time. And Primary Countdown, we'll be right back. Southland voting centers are now open. They will be open daily from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. and you can save time voting in person by using the Poll Pass. The optional tool allows voters to review and mark their selections before visiting a vote center. And for more on the June primary, go to our website, cbsla.com. Just click on 2022 Primary Voter Guide to get a breakdown of major races and candidates. Thanks so much for joining us this past month for Primary Countdown Series. We'll have, of course, a complete live coverage on the election night next Tuesday on CBS 2, KCAL 9, and CBS News Los Angeles, streaming right here. Until then, I'm Tom Waite. Have a great night.